The sun hung mercilessly over the Texas frontier, turning the town square into a furnace of dust and noise. Wagons creaked, boots scraped, and the low murmur of voices rose into an eager hum. People had gathered not for trade in grain or cattle, but for something more sinister, an auction of flesh. Among the prisoners brought in that day was one who stood apart from the rest, towering above the crowd even in her shackles. She was an Apache woman, taller than most men, her frame broad-shouldered and powerful. The settlers whispered and laughed, calling her a giantess, mocking her size as if her strength made her less than a woman. The iron at her wrists clinked with each movement, but she did not bow. She stood proud and silent, her dark eyes steady, refusing to give the mob the satisfaction of seeing her broken. The auctioneer cracked his whip in the air, his voice booming with theatrics. "Step right up. Never seen the like of her, folks. Strong as two men, worth her weight in gold for labor." The crowd laughed, some shouting crude suggestions. Too big for any husband. One man jeered, another spat at the ground, muttering, "Better off slaughtered than put to work." The cruelty rolled off their tongues like second nature, the laughter striking sharper than the sun itself. Still she did not flinch. Though she could not understand every word, she understood tone, mockery, and contempt. Her silence was defiance, her dignity intact even as her wrists bled from the shackles. That silence, however, only made the crowd jeer louder, eager to see her spirit crushed. Children tugged at their mothers' skirts, pointing with wide eyes, whispering of a monster. Men with whiskey on their breath joked about who would dare tame such a creature. Women in bonnets whispered behind gloved hands, their voices dripping with disdain. Too large, too savage, too wild to ever belong among them. To them she was less than human, an oddity to gawk at, a commodity to be sold. The auctioneer grinned, sensing the frenzy build. "She's yours for the right price, gentlemen. Fit for the mines, for hauling, for whatever work you've got." His words cracked across the square, each one reducing her existence to labor and profit. She stood motionless, but deep inside her heart beat with both fear and anger. Her tribe had been scattered, her freedom stripped, and now they sought to sell her dignity piece by piece. Ethan Granger had not come to town for the auction. He had ridden in to purchase supplies, salt, flour, nails for fencing. His life as a cowboy had been one of hard labor and silence, his days marked by the lowing of cattle and the endless stretch of land. But as he tied his horse and stepped toward the square, the sound of mocking laughter drew him in. He pushed his way through the crowd, his eyes narrowing at the sight before him. And then he saw her, tall, strong, chained but unbroken. Where the crowd saw a spectacle, Ethan saw something else. A human soul cornered like an animal, her pride still burning bright beneath the dust. His jaw tightened. He had buried his wife years ago and had known loneliness ever since. But the sight of her struck him not with desire, but with a strange and fierce recognition. He knew cruelty when he saw it, and he would not stand idle. The auctioneer's voice rang out again. "What'll you give me, gentlemen? She's worth every penny in sweat and toil. Start me at $50. The crowd hesitated. A few men grumbled, but no bids came. Too large, too intimidating, too unfit for their narrow needs. The auctioneer's smile faltered, and he barked again, lowering the price. $40. 35. Still, only jeers answered him. One man called, "No use feeding a beast that size." Another shouted, "Cut her down for meat and be done with it." The crowd roared with laughter, the words slicing sharper than the iron chains. She lifted her chin higher, refusing to lower her gaze, but inside, her strength wavered. Her people were gone, her fate at the mercy of those who saw her as nothing more than a burden. Yet she would not bow. Her pride was all she had left. Ethan stepped forward then, his voice cutting through the jeers. "I'll take her." The crowd turned, surprised. Laughter broke out again, louder this time. "You, Granger, a skinny cowboy like you." One man sneered. "What'll you do with her? She'll crush you before you can get a night's work out of her." The auctioneer blinked, then quickly recovered, sensing a sale at last. "You heard him, gentlemen. Bid stands at $35 from Mr. Granger." Ethan's eyes never left hers. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the savings of months, sweat earned under the burning sun, dollars that were meant to rebuild his ranch. With steady hands, he laid the bills down. "Cash, she's mine." The jeers grew sharper, mocking his choice, calling him mad, but Ethan didn't care. All he saw was the silent woman. Her eyes locked on his, a flicker of something. Was it disbelief? Hope? Passing through her gaze, the auctioneer's hammer fell with a sharp crack. "Sold to Mr. Granger!" The crowd erupted in laughter, some shaking their heads, others making crude jokes. Ethan ignored them, pushing through the mob to where she stood. The guards unlocked the chains, shoving her forward roughly, but Ethan caught her before she stumbled. For the first time since her capture, she felt a touch that wasn't cruel or mocking. He steadied her, his grip firm but gentle. Her eyes met his, and though no words passed between them, she understood something had shifted. This was not ownership. This was not another cage. This was something closer to rescue, though she dared not believe it fully yet. The sun beat down, the crowd jeered, but in that moment, a fragile thread of trust was spun between a broken cowboy and a woman too strong to break. As Ethan led her away from the square, the laughter and jeers faded behind them. The dust clung to their boots, the weight of chains still heavy on her wrists, but each step carried her farther from the cruelty of the crowd. She walked beside him, silent, unsure of what future awaited her, but for the first time in weeks, perhaps months, she did not feel entirely alone. Ethan glanced at her, his face unreadable, but his eyes steady. "Don't look back," he said quietly. She didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. She kept her gaze forward, her pride unbroken. As they stepped out of the square together, two souls, scarred by the world, bound now by fate. That night, the ride from the town square to Ethan's small ranch felt longer than any journey he had taken. The prairie wind howled across the open land, the sky stretching endless above them, stars flickering cold and distant. He led the horse at a steady pace, the Apache woman walking beside him in silence, chains still dragging against her wrists. Her steps were firm, not stumbling, but he could feel the weight of exhaustion in the way her shoulders slumped ever so slightly. He wanted to free her then and there, to break the iron that mocked her pride, but he waited until they reached the quiet safety of his ranch. When the door of his cabin closed behind them, shutting out the echoes of the jeering crowd, he reached for the shackles. The lock clicked, and the chains fell to the dirt floor. Her wrists, raw and bruised, bore angry marks. She pulled them close to her chest, eyes dark and unreadable. Ethan didn't press her. He only set food on the table, simple bread, beans, and a pot of coffee, and pushed it gently toward her. He placed a wool blanket over the chair nearest the fire, then stepped back, giving her space. For a long time she stood there, tense, her gaze flicking from him to the food, as though expecting a trick. She had known too much cruelty, too many false promises, to accept kindness without suspicion. But hunger finally pressed her forward. She sat, lifting the bread with steady hands, and bit into it. Ethan watched her silently, his face calm, showing no judgment, no pity. When her cup was empty, he refilled it without a word. Only once did he speak, his voice steady, almost tender. "You're safe here. No one will touch you again." She did not answer, but for the first time since he had seen her, she did not hold herself like a woman ready to fight. The days that followed settled into a fragile rhythm. Ethan rose with the dawn, tending to his cattle and fixing the broken sections of his fence. She remained near the cabin at first, cautious, watching him work from a distance. Yet little by little, she began to move closer, curiosity drawing her past the weight of fear. One morning, when he struggled to lift a fallen post alone, she walked forward without a word. Her hands gripped the timber, her strength making the work effortless where his had faltered. Together they set it into the earth. Ethan stepped back, breathing hard, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Thank you," he said quietly. She didn't answer, but her eyes lingered on him a heartbeat longer than before. In those silent exchanges, trust began to grow, not demanded, not forced, but slowly, like rain soaking into parched soil. Though language stood between them, gestures and actions became their bridge. She brought him herbs she had gathered along the edge of the prairie, pressing them into his hands with short words in her tongue. He accepted them, repeating the words she spoke, clumsy but earnest. In return, he showed her the workings of his ranch, how to milk the cow, how to mend a rope, how to handle the temper of his restless horse. At first she only watched, her expression guarded, but soon she joined him, her laughter soft and rare when the horse jerked away from his grip. That sound startled Ethan more than anything, the sound of joy from a woman who had endured chains and humiliation. He found himself listening for it, yearning for it, as if it lit a fire in the emptiness he had carried for so long. Each evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, they shared simple meals by the fire. The silence between them grew comfortable, filled with the small sounds of eating, the crackle of flames, the whisper of wind against the cabin walls. One night, she traced the scars on her wrists with her fingers, then lifted her gaze to his. Her voice, halting and uncertain, broke the quiet. "You saved me." The words were heavy with meaning, her English broken but her intent clear. Ethan shook his head, his voice low. "No, you saved me too." She frowned, not understanding. He gestured to himself. Then the empty cabin, the bare table, the lonely stretch of prairie outside. His life had been silence, sorrow, a hollow echo since the day his wife had died. Her arrival, though born from cruelty, had filled that silence with something new, something alive. She understood enough. Her eyes softened, and for the first time her lips curved into the faintest smile. The bond between them grew not from words, but from shared work and unspoken respect. She mended the cabin roof with him, her strong arms steady as she held beams in place. She showed him which plants could ease pain, pressing crushed leaves to a cut on his hand. He in turn gave her freedom, never questioning where she walked, never binding her again, never treating her as less than equal. She began to sleep without fear, curled beneath the wool blanket by the hearth. Ethan often lay awake, listening to her breathing, feeling the strange peace that filled the cabin. Once he reached across the table to hand her bread, their fingers brushing. The touch was brief, accidental, but it lingered in his chest like the echo of thunder on the plains. For a man who had long believed his heart dead, the spark was both terrifying and miraculous. As spring deepened, word of Ethan's purchase spread among neighboring ranchers and townsfolk. Some rode by, jeering from the road, mocking him for keeping a giantess. One evening, a pair of drunk cowhands leaned against his fence, shouting insults. "Hey, Granger! How's the beast in your bed?" Their laughter carried on the wind. Ethan stood in the doorway, fury burning in his gut. But when he turned, he saw her standing tall behind him, her gaze fierce and unyielding. She had endured worse than words. She placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture simple yet grounding. Together, they ignored the taunts, and eventually the men rode off, disappointed by their silence. In that moment, Ethan understood that she was not only strong in body, but unbreakable in spirit. She needed no saving from men's laughter, yet he would still stand against the world for her. Just as she had stood against cruelty all her life, weeks turned into months, and the prairie changed with the season. Wildflowers bloomed along the edges of the fields, cattle grazed on fresh grass, and the air grew warm and sweet. Their partnership deepened into something neither had expected. They moved as one, their days entwined, working, laughing, learning. She taught him Apache words, patient with his clumsy tongue, and he taught her the slow drawl of English, smiling when she repeated his phrases with a proud grin. More than language, though, they taught each other belonging. Ethan no longer ate in silence, no longer stared into the fire with only memories for company. She no longer carried the weight of chains or the sting of jeering crowds. Together, they built not just survival, but a fragile home. One evening, as twilight settled across the plains, Ethan sat with her outside the cabin. The sky burned with streaks of orange and purple, the land stretching endless before them. She looked at him, her eyes steady, and spoke with more certainty than before. "Not slave. Not beast, woman. The word struck him like a hammer, filled with pride and defiance. He nodded, his voice rough. A woman, and more, stronger than anyone I've ever known. She reached out then, her hand brushing his, the touch deliberate this time. His heart thundered, his breath catching. She had been sold as property, mocked as unfit. Yet here she claimed her own humanity, and he met her there, not as owner, not as savior, but as a man who saw her fully. In that quiet, under the endless sky, two broken lives bound themselves together, not by chains but by choice, and so the cowboy, once lonely and lost, found a partner fierce as the land itself. And the Apache woman, once mocked as too big to belong, found herself not diminished but honored. Their story was not of ownership but of defiance, of dignity reclaimed in a world that sought to strip it away. In each other, they found something the frontier rarely allowed: respect, belonging, and a bond strong enough to weather every storm.